Welcome to the first volume of Departures, brought to you by the Dublin Book Festival. Now that restrictions are lifted, we're out touring the land, meeting up with writers, poets and musicians to find out about how the landscape inspires them.
Oh, it's hugely important. It's generative ground which all of my work comes from.
But you have to sit down and just listen to the birds and feel the heat, even smell the blossoms.
And I think that's what nature writing does, landscape writing does. It helps others see.
I've never thought to think about it in that way before. It changes the world. It changes that square inch of landscape that we're looking at.
Exploring is huge for me. I don't think you're going to find stuff unless you go and explore.
Wicklow is a county of wild strands, of wooded valleys, of rugged mountains. And today I'm here in the mountains in Brooklodge, Macreddin village, with the nature and travel writer Michael Fure and the poet Jane Clarke. And what I'm hoping to do is to get a sense of what landscape, of what place has meant in their lives and in their creative work. So Jane, place. Are you rooted in particular places in your life?
Well, two places really, because I grew up on a farm in Roscommon. And then I moved here with my wife about 25 years ago. So it's both Roscommon and Wicklow. But I only started to write poetry since we started to live here. So I do think that being in this place, this beautiful landscape in Wicklow, is part of the reason why I started to write.
Interesting. And so your books, your two main poetry books published by Blood Axe, the River and When the Tree Falls, are so immersed in Roscommon, give us such a picture of Roscommon, but you're in a different place writing though.
Yeah, I think isn't it that thing about memory? And sometimes one needs distance to access the memory. And so I was living, amongst fields in Wicklow with the sheep and the cows and the cattle. And so I think it was being there that evoked these very powerful memories of my childhood on a farm. And then because my father then was ill when I was writing the second book, and I had to write about the farm when I was writing about my father because he'd lived there all his life to the age of 87. So place and people are totally intertwined in my writing, but in an awful lot of nature writing.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about Roscommon. Are your memories of it as a place of oppression, a place of wonder, a place of magic, a place of work? Or what?
Well, I suppose it's a place of great beauty, a very different type of beauty to here. Like here is kind of magnificent. It's very exciting, the height of the trees, the height of the mountains. Roscommon is this flat county, a county of water. I think of it as a county of water, like bogland and lakes and streams and turlocks. So there's all the wonder of that. But then it was also growing up on a farm in the 60s, 70s. I left in 1978 when I was 17 to go to Dublin. I thought I'd never get to Dublin. So, it was a place of quite a lot of constraint. And I was glad to get away. So I was very surprised in my early 40s to find myself mining that landscape. And other people who knew me were surprised at the poetry I was writing because they associated me with either Dublin or Wicklow. So I do think that your writing reveals things to yourself, and showed me how landscape was embedded in me. And now the Wicklow landscape, because I'm here now 25 years, I wasn't writing about Wicklow, but now I'm writing much more out of Wicklow, which I'm interested in seeing that change.
Yeah. And I'd love, Roscommon is often a county that gets ignored, so I'd love to ask you maybe just to express or to sum up Roscommon at some point, but I'm curious about Michael, I'm curious about the places that have inspired you or that you come from, you arise out of.
I think a bit like Jane, I was inspired as a child. I think you begin to know nature as a child. And I was inspired by my mother on the one hand. Every bird in the garden she identified for me, introduced me to. introduced me to, let's say, the songs, the bird song of that particular bird. And there weren't all that many, the standard birds, and I remember them all. But also she was terrific on detail. A flower, from a wild flower, like for instance primroses, she was able to point out all the different bits without being, she wasn't a botanist, just loved it. So that love that she had for everything about simple nature came through to me. And then my father was great for taking us into the mountains. And he took me up to the Comores, and when I was quite young, he took me up to a nice summit. And I stood there and I said, crikey, when I was in school, they were saying that Ireland is like a saucer with mountains around the rim and the Bog of Allen in the middle. Who's ever heard of the Bog of Allen in recent times? But however, the Bog of Allen is in the middle. So I could see that this was right. I was standing on a mountain and the sea, the glistening sea, was behind me. And I could see other mountains along that edge. So I said, this is true, it is a saucer. And but the biggest one about that mountain thing was the feeling that all of that nature was laid out for miles away. A wondrous thing to think that every bush there has a bird in it, every hedge has a flower. It's everywhere. So I then, like Jane, 17, off to Dublin, study architecture, and for years then it just went away. Living in digs in Sing Street and things like that, it just went away. But then later, when my children were born, then I began to connect with them and hope to connect them with nature the way my mother did.
And so, like as you said, it's very unusual. You've had a full career as an architect, you're even teaching architect, and yet in the last 30 years, you've written over 20 books about so many different landscapes, so many different places, from the Beara Way, the Wicklow Way, a lot of books focused on Dublin, a fair amount of books focused on different places in Waterford and Wicklow, crossing journeys from Dublin Bay to Galway Bay, even journeys along the whole Atlantic coastline from Portugal up to Dublin. So there's something, Portugal up to the west coast of Ireland. There's something connecting, as you say, nature is so important, but place seems to root it as well. Tell me.
I believe in exploring, Manchán. Exploring is huge for me. I don't think you're going to find stuff unless you go and explore. Now that may be sitting in your garden and just... I wrote a series of articles some years ago called Stop, Sit, Look and Listen, because I was spending a lot of time climbing mountains. You know the way you're bagging peaks and all that kind of thing. But you have to sit down and just listen to the birds, feel the heat, even smell the blossoms. So anyway, with the children, I began to try and pass on to them the same kind of thing my mother had passed on to me. And that was reasonable success, but we'll see. We'll see.
And not only to your children, but your books. I'm just thinking, there's so many, but particularly Naturama, the books for children by Gill, or the last year's book, A Natural Year, which makes one see one's surroundings in an entirely new way, a way that none of us have the patience for almost.
That book was simply a selection from my journals. See, once I started writing, and the thing I'm sure Jane found too, once you start writing, it's terribly difficult to stop. I found it's terribly difficult to stop. So I've been writing journals since the 70s of anything and everything that happens, not political events or anything, but anything that happens. If I saw a deer one day, I'd say, I saw a deer. And I'd still write that. So it was easy to write that particular book, A Natural Year, because it broke the year into the months and what we actually saw out the kitchen window and on the mountainside. And down in our place down in Waterford, what we saw. And so that's all it was. It's just writing down what we saw.
Michael, you're so self-depreciating. There's nothing about just starting to write and continuing to write. The observations, the insights in those books, in all of your books, are revelatory. You have a way of being in a landscape, of being in a place and somehow getting under the skin of it. What's at the basis? How do you do that?
I'm awfully simple. And I think and I have no kind of ideas about being a writer or being anything really other than a curious person. Curiositas is one of my other kind of things. I'm very curious. Mm-hmm. And that's all there is to it. I'm curious and I want to know why. What's that bird in the background there now? It's curiositas.
But
and exploring, and that's it.
and there's a sense often that we look to the same, when we're talking about landscape and places, we talk about the Wild Atlantic Way, or we talk about the top of a Wicklow Mountain. But both of you have explored unassuming, overlooked places because that's where you're from. So just Michael, since we're talking about, like, half of the latest book is looking at suburban Dublin, like Rathfarnham, that sort of area, an area that no one else would stop to even think about. And you're showing us there's a wonderland here.
Well, I think it's so important for a broad number of the population to realise how important nature is. And not big nature like the Galapagos and South America, but how important small nature is, the little things in our gardens. And until they learn about this and learn to love those things, they're not going to be sensitised enough to sort of go on a march about environment or about global warming. It's more important to have a love of nature than anything else. And this book was to attempt to show that, in fact, the truth is, my garden in suburban Dublin has more species of flora and fauna around it than my rural place in County Waterford, which is in the middle of a big farming area. So a lot of the things that they would normally have in the old days in the countryside are actually gone. The bats are decreasing, the moths are decreasing, and therefore the bats are decreasing. But I still can go outside my back door in Rathfarnham and watch the bats in the evening, taking over from the swifts. But most people don't know that. They'd be horrified if they thought there were bats flying around. But they should know that. And also the gardens. Suburban gardens are just full of the most incredible range of plants and flowers that people stick in to try and create a bit of nature for themselves. They don't know that they're doing that, but that's what they're doing. So you get this rich, suburban areas are actually extremely rich in natural terms.
Jane, would you summon up Roscommon for me, if you would? Like, you know, I live in the Midlands and it saddens me so much the Midlands are overlooked. I know Roscommon does not claim to be anywhere near the Midlands. Every county that can try and escape, Cavan will say it's a border, Roscommon will say it's in the west. But summon up Roscommon. Roscommon does not get thought about much.
Yeah, I suppose I'd just say West Midlands is what I think we'd say. But also there's something about crossing the Shannon that does make a difference.
Yes.
And whenever I cross the Shannon, I feel like I'm in my home place. And my father used to hate going across the Shannon the other direction. He'd go anywhere west. But yeah, Roscommon. Well, I suppose it's a quiet county, but it is absolutely stunningly beautiful, and it has wilderness in it. Like the bogland in Roscommon is wilderness, and the rivers in Roscommon, and like the River Suck, which is the one that I wrote a lot about because it flows at the bottom of our farm, you know. But the life that goes along with the river, the sounds, the bird life, the moths, all of that goes along with it. I mean, I suppose, the other thing that I think of Roscommon is turloughs, because people think of turloughs with the burn, but actually there are a lot of turloughs, and there were an awful lot of turloughs around us growing up, and I think it's one of the most mysterious things, the way a lake can be there one day and gone the next. And I always feel like no wonder people believed in fairies and because how else could you explain something like that? But so I suppose what happened for me, because I've used loads of your books over the years, because I was a hill walker, so I was going for the high places as well. But then Roscommon, when it's about being there and the listening and taking time and I suppose for me it was refinding the beauty and the connection and the meaning. Like, for example, at the moment, the marsh marigolds have been out, the yellow iris is coming out, the flaggers, they're going to be coming out. So there's so much change there. The orange tip butterfly that loves the cuckoo flower, and all of that you see around the river in Roscommon. I knew all of that when I was a child, but we didn't have words for it. We didn't have names.
Yes.
Like I knew silverweed, and I knew pineapple weed, and I knew, ribwort plantain. But then a bit like what you said, you said you came back to those things later in life, and that's what happened to me. And writing taught me an awful lot, because to write, you do have to look at detail. You do, and so I had to find the names. So through the writing, it was a rediscovering. And then I think books like yours, Michael, help people see what's there. I think that's the gift of a book like Michael, because people are walking around, but then people like me go to books like yours to find the words for what we're seeing and to help us look. And I think that's what nature writing does, landscape writing does. It helps others see. Do you see what I mean? And in the process then
Thank you.
of either re-engaging with the love they had as a child, or just falling in love for the first time with what's around them. So that's why I think nature writing is so important. I think in Ireland we're rather late coming to it compared to other parts, and that's partly our agricultural background.
Yes.
But I'm so glad we're doing it now, and I think it's given people so much pleasure and meaning, and I do think it's a part of changing our attitude to nature.
Seraphim lying in your pale skin, whisper low, God forbid they hear our woes. Holes in the ground and we want to fall in. To be seen, not heard is a worrying thing. Glass I see through the lies they tell. Sit alone, wicked wish on our tongue. Holes in the wall where the ice creeps in. To be seen, not heard is a worrying thing. To be seen, not heard is a worrying thing. So we stand drinking of the last of the light. Common girl, watch it disappear. Holes in the sky where the night slips in. To be seen, not heard is a worrying thing. Seraphim dancing in the way you did. Whisper low, God forbid they hear our woes. Holes in the ground and we're about to fall in. To be seen, not heard is a worrying thing. To be seen, not heard is a worrying thing. Why do you hold your head so low, so low, so low, so low, so low, so low? So, 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 so. Why do you hold your head so low, 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 so low? So, 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 so. Take me far away from the crowds. Take me far away from the crowds, oh the maddening crowds. Take me far away from the crowds, oh the maddening crowds. maddening crowds.
Jane, this is so exciting. Like you've hit on a rich vein there. Like when you mentioned this pineapple weed, I am curious. I want to know the orange tip butterfly. I've never heard of those things. But had we had this conversation 5 years ago, my brain would have probably drifted off. There's something happening among all of us.
Yes.
We now want to know more. We're seeing things and realizing the lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
And there's been those who have been documenting nature for a long time, and Michael, you're one of those people. And you know, An Irishman's Diary, these bits of glimpses of nature that so many of us ignored. And like I'm thinking, you know, you're walking trails that the first books that many of us got are doing the Wicklow Way or doing the Beara Way or doing where's your books. But then you were based there with these people before you, the likes of Joss Lynham, who were also saying, go out into nature. And there was another great walker or person who publicised walks that you were writing about recently.
Yeah, I spent the COVID period doing a biography of J.B. Malone, who wrote in the region of 4,000 articles in the Evening Herald, one a week from 1938 until 1970 something or other. But he would have introduced legions of Dubliners to walking, because the Dublin Hills and Wicklow Hills are right there on the doorstep. So he was terrific like that. But strange enough, J.B. Malone, and I was fortunate enough to be allowed to see all his journals and he wrote about his marches. You know, it was a march he went on, and I was able to see them all. But the funny thing is, in all his walks, he never once mentions a tree, or a plant, or a flower. So there you have it.
Yes.
He's interested in weather, and he's interested in geology, and stuff like that. But he never mentions the other ones. So I found that strange. But there you are. There are different ways of looking at everything.
Yeah. And like, so if your previous books were about long trails, long walks, and now they just seem to be a lot of them seem to be more about nature. Is there an agenda? Would you like to awaken people to their sense of place?
I think it's awfully important that anybody who has a love of nature just passes it on. That's basically it. And one of the reasons I started writing at all, Manchán, was I went into the hills and I found these wonderful things, the rabbits and deer and flowers. And I just wanted to share it and say, do you not realise that only 3 miles from here, there are fabulous things you can spend? And again, I had a stressful job in Dublin City. And on Saturday morning when I came, you know, I'd go for a walk. Went for running, first of all, and I got too dizzy. And then I stopped and said, why am I running? Because look, I'm missing everything else. So I started that way. And then I saw all these things and thought I should write about them. But also, I was a great fan of the English nature writers. And as you say, we haven't, you know, we only have come lately to this thing. But at jumble sales, I used to find that, and particularly at Church of Ireland jumble sales, you'd find these beautifully cared for, gilt-spined books on simple nature, on birds, on plants. You'd never find them in Catholic sales work, I have to say. But I built a library out of these. And I wondered why we haven't written about nature. So I began to look at the Gaelic poets and what they had written. And there is a huge amount of stuff there. And in fact, there's a new book out, Andrew Carpenter has a new book out of the Irish poets and nature. So it was there, but it hasn't come to the fore. And I hope more will come to the fore.
Like, Jane, you know, you were saying that you're now going to the likes of Michael Furey or to other writers about nature of a place, but I'm going to your poems about place. Like, I am seeing nature in an entirely way. I keep hens, and you had there's a line in, well, there's, you describe in the river, precisely splaying one wrinkled yellow foot before the other. Like, I've seen hens walking carefully, precisely splaying. I've never thought to think about it in that way before. It changes the world. It changes that square inch of landscape that we're looking at.
Yeah.
And they're from you? That's hard wrought observation from your side?
Well, say for example that poem, I was in Inishbofin and it was a sunny day and I was trying to write that poem about the hens and my mother and the hens in the yard, but there were hens on the road in Inishbofin, so I just watched them, and that brought me back to the yard. But yeah, it was the observation, and again, I did see those, you know, the way they're yellow crinkled. I saw that as a child, but I wouldn't have put words on it then. And I suppose I didn't know that had value as a child. And it's now I know that that's precious, and those memories are precious. And poetry, of course, really pushes you to get detail. That's what distinguishes poetry in particular. So then you start looking in a different way. But I mean, I've just written another poem about hens recently. So, you know, I do think that those, I mean, like, hens are very characteristic. They have tremendous personalities. And so again, you know, so many more people are keeping hens nowadays. And again, we lost our relationship with so much for a number of years, but we're finding it again.
Part of that,
yeah.
Part of, you know, what you're saying, I've moved towards poetry. In fact, that latest book, I have a piece of poetry for every month or every period, because I found only in those poetic lines can the thing be succinctly put in just a few words. And I was hugely interested in how poets actually do that. I find it's an impossibility for me, but I think poetry is so important now. I mean, I'm beginning to move towards quoting poetry far more than, and of course nature poetry, Gerard Manley Hopkins about the wildness and the wet and all these things, it's all there. And you're just bringing that into the modern era when it's most important, more important than when Wordsworth was writing.
Because we're losing things?
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
Are you seeing that?
Oh, without a doubt. I mentioned to you that in my rural place in Waterford, you know, I can remember there being pine martens there, and I remember being shown by a farmer. He called it a polecat, but it pine martens, and a raft of different things, different animals and different plants even that are disappearing. I mean, when people buy a rural site now, they mow the grass. The verge is kind of a 2-meter verge, and they'll mow that, and then they'll knock the hedge and put a white concrete block wall up. They've destroyed a whole ecosystem. I mean, where are the plants supposed to go anymore? The fields are not used anymore because of the fertilizers. So anyway, I don't want to go on about that, but it's just that we should look a little more carefully and act a little more carefully. And I've become disgusted recently that I actually tar macadam in my front drive in my Dublin house, and I'm embarrassed now. I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
You know, I'm beginning to become sensitized myself.
But what a revelation that we're becoming aware that we didn't know. Like 20 years ago, I was using glyphosate. I was using Roundup. We didn't know the impact. We were putting chemicals into our own bodies. So something is changing. But would you, Michael, we're in Leinster at the moment, and it sort of feels disloyal to talk about Waterford. But, you know, I can see in your current writing, Waterford seems to be a place that feeds you as well. Will you give me a sense of where you are in Waterford, where that other rootedness is, how it inspires?
The sea. You know, more than anything else, the sea, the cliffs, the coast. The coast is a most amazing thing because it's a kind of a cross-section through the history of the world. You can look back, stand on a beach and look back 500 million years in one view of layers of rocks coming down. That excites me. It excites me terribly. I feel a bit ridiculous, but you can look at that. So coastlines, and also coastlines are a terrific place to understand erosion, how land gets built and how land gets wasted away. And down where I am in County Waterford, there's a particular beach I've been photographing now for 20 years, where the sea is moving in further and further. The sand is going. Anyway, it's an erosion occurring, but it's geology occurring. We all think geology is something that happens over millions of years. It doesn't. It's happening right now. And if you look carefully for more than 10 minutes, you'll see it. So the coast for me, I love swimming. We were always swimming and on the beaches. So the coast is big for me. And the Waterford coast is actually a very interesting coast. It's got lots of interesting stuff. And I think Lloyd Prager said it's not much noticed, which it isn't. People used to come to Ireland, they'd come into Rosslare and drive to Kerry, bypassing Waterford completely. And West Cork, of course, is well known. But the Waterford coast is special. And I don't write much about it because I don't want too many people to turn up.
Yeah. Like the Comoras is still unexplored ground
Yes.
for me. It's somewhere I don't know. I know nothing about it. I'm dying to know about
Wonderful.
it. Yeah.
And relatively easy. And wonderful lakes. Comoras is all about lakes and deep combes. Well worth visiting.
Right. And Jane, in one way, as you said, like having come from a place which most of us still don't know, Roscommon, you're now for so long been rooted in Wicklow. And one would think that's a place we're all familiar with because it appears in every film and every TV, and just because it was so near Dublin. And yet, in your published work is still looking at Roscommon, but a lot of your work now is all from Wicklow. And I am learning, coming up here today, I saw Wicklow in an entirely different way, going through valleys, and you mentioning that people would be cycling up until the 1950s, 30 kilometres to go mining underground in Wicklow. So are you beginning to see, or have you known there's a different Wicklow from the tourist Wicklow that we know?
Well, that was really important for me. Because I'd been hill walking in Wicklow for years and years, and then a local community group was developing this Miners' Way. And they spoke about this particular miner, Robbie Carter, who lives in Ashford and who's probably about 84, 85. And when I heard about him, people who had heard him speak found him very moving. The way he talked about his years as a miner when he went into the mines first when he was 16, like many at the time. And so I went and met him and just rang him out of the blue and said, would it be okay to come and talk to you? I just felt there was a poem there. Two miners lead two mules up a winding track, past the smelting house and Ballinafunchog Addit. Hobnail boots and iron-shod hooves grind pine needles into granite. Halfway up, they stop to drink from the stream that flashes through gorse and Frockin to the Millbrook water wheel. The mules lengthen their stride at the pass, unflinching when Wimbrel careen from cotton grass calls rippling across the heath. At the edge of the cutting, the men bend and heave to fill the creels with footed peat. Above them, forked tail and finger-tipped wings, a lone red kite glides bronze as withered bracken. It led to one poem coming from Robbie's, but then a whole series of poems, about 8 poems, which then we made into a radio programme about the Miners' Way. But I also met another miner who had worked with the horses in the mines, the ponies, the pit ponies, and so that led to a poem. But also,
do you think that was for BBC? Or the radio record? Are they still available? Do you think?
It's not available, unfortunately, because loads of people ask that. BBC don't, they will repeat it sometime in the future, but you can't just access it. It's gone off. But Also, the Glenmalure Valley was one of the three valleys. It's Glenmalure, Glendalough and Glendassan were the three valleys where the mining was. And of course, we lived there at Glenmalure. So of course that had particular interest. And lots of our neighbours were connected with the mines in some way. And, you know, there was a story that every Christmas morning the miners would walk from the top of the valley, the whole way along the valley, to go to Mass or to go to the Church of Ireland church, because a lot of them were from, say, Cornwall or Yorkshire. And that walk every Christmas morning, so that led to a poem. You know, these things. Washed clean as ore in a buddle, the miners hold lanterns high to guide them the length of the glen. Sore heads beg for peace after a night in the shebeen. Black eyes and bruises bear witness to fistfights at the brothel door. Tumbling down from Camanabullogue, where mica schist and granite meet, the Avonbeg River keeps pace with their homesick stride. Like copper and zinc at the jig table, the men divide at Greenan Bridge for Latin Mass in St. Columba's, morning prayer at Ballinatone. They belt out carols they learned as children, listen to the story of hope, then kneel to petition God for clear lungs, safe shifts, and the price of lead to hold. It deepened my understanding of the landscape. That landscape isn't just about what you see. It's about the people who've lived here, the people who've died here, the people who've brought up families here. And so it's that whole thing that people are part of nature, and also that people are shaped by their landscape. I think that's really interesting, how we are psychologically shaped by our landscape.
So tell me more about that, and then Michael, I'd love your insight. That's a fascinating concept. So people are shaped by their landscape.
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, say one of the things, I've written a poem recently called Fences, and it's about the whole concept of neighbour. You know, the whole thing of you have to have good fences to be a good neighbour, the Robert Frost idea. But actually, like where we live, we've had quite a lot of heavy snows in the winter, which I never would have had in Roscommon. You know, there'd be snow and be gone in the morning. So here you need your neighbours in a different way. Neighbourliness is different when you live in a mountainous area. And even though now everybody has a 4x4 or whatever, our neighbours we didn't have a 4x4, our neighbours who had one were helping us. The fellow with the tractor was clearing the drive for us. But also people were bringing bread, homemade bread, to the gate. I mean, really and truly that happened. How wonderful is that? Yes. You know? So, but we didn't need that kind of Now there's a very strong neighbourliness in Roscommon. But that type of, it's something about survival. Do you see what I mean? When you're pitted against the elements in a different way. And I think that goes back generations in Wicklow, in the valleys in Wicklow. Yeah. So that's just an example of how it influences.
Yes.
Michael?
No, it's one of the things that fascinates me. I studied geology many years ago, and it dawned on me what everything was about, really, in a kind of a way, and that we're just passing through.
Yeah.
We're just passing through. But Ireland is a tremendously rich little island in geological terms. I mean, every 20 miles you go, the scenery changes because the geology changes. And I'm always reminded of a wonderful thing that I was told by a Kerry man years ago. Kerry and Clare, as you know, are separated by the Shannon estuary. It's only a few miles, really, but their geology is completely different. Kerry is a sandstone place and Clare is a limestone place. And I was thinking on this, and he gave me the answer. He said, a Kerry man goes into a bar and he says, have you heard this one? And then he immediately tells a story. A Clare man goes into a bar and he says, have you heard this one? And he whips out a tin whistle and he plays a tune. Brilliant. So Clare is a musical county. Kerry is a storytelling county. And, and they're different people. They have different accents. And they've lived there for many, many thousands of years. So it's kind of there is this thing about the limestone fella plays the tin whistle and the sandstone man tells stories. I don't know, but that's an example. I just thought that was an amusing example.
There is something in there. We are created by the landscape. The more that we're realizing about the microbiome and how everything, I think first it was biologists told us that we are part of ecosystems, and then biospheres and complicated ideas, and then we realize inside of us is a microbiome, and then we realize everything is somewhat connected. So we're slowly having to understand landscape, that it's not something we look at like Wordsworth did, it's something more profound.
Yeah, and
Yes.
even learning now the trees communicate with each other and the trees help each other and help each other survive. Sure, doesn't that change totally how you experience trees and forests and woodland? If you think of all that's going on under our feet and the way they're communicating, But also what you were saying, Michael, because I have a garden, we've a garden now in Wicklow, and there's always it's impossible to get rid of the brambles, right? And then suddenly I began to think about, I am the visitor here. I'm only here for a short time. The brambles own this place. So again, that really changes how you see gardening.
Yes.
Rather than me being mad at the brambles, I'm thinking, well, actually, I'm the interloper. I've got it just for a little while. Whereas, of course, we were trained to control nature
That's a
and
wonderful
to dominate
insight
it.
of that. You're absolutely right. All you have to do is, like my country place over the last number of months, when I went back, I found nature had almost moved in.
Yeah.
But isn't it wonderful to think that we're not so important
No,
anymore?
this is it.
We are not so important.
That's what nature shows you. That's what
Passing
nature
through.
tells you.
Yeah.
And every
Actually.
now and then the earth kind of gives a little shake and there's a huge earthquake, and all of man's technology can't cope with anything like it, and it's disaster. And it only just, for a lot of people, it doesn't even register. But for me, it registers. We're only passing through here. The other things, as you say, the trees communicating. I absolutely believe that things are happening that we have no idea of, and science isn't telling us much about it.
I'm laughing because this could almost be a hallucinatory trip. We could all be sitting here as three stoners, but something radical has happened in the last 18 months. Like these conversations are now being had.
Yeah.
And we're all saying we're all one. Which we believed science telling us that everything was separate and you could put everything in a sterile petri dish and how it reacted under the microscope was how it reacted. And somehow now we're going out walking and we're feeling things. In your poems bring that alive. Nature has an impact on us. It has resonances in the same way with your descriptions of the daily, of the passing year in the natural year. Something has happened. But we shouldn't, if we're looking at landscape and Ireland and place, I'm wary of being too positive. And not about the future, I don't want to get into, but it's just, there's darkness in our landscape too. I'm particularly Roscommon, that's unfair. But yeah, tell me about that. Is the landscape, does it have shadows in it as well?
Well, I suppose the relationship between farmers and land, pollution, industrial pollution, agricultural pollution. You have to talk about that as part of the shadows. And that did come out, presumably, from a philosophical view of nature. How that we viewed it as ours to do whatever we liked with it. And obviously, from Christianity, dominate, from a patriarchal kind of system as well. So, there are shadows. And we are reaping the hurt of those shadows now. And I mean, I read once somebody saying that, because of the famine, and I do think there must be a truth in that. Somebody was saying that in the famine, nature let Irish people down. It so deeply. And that out of that disappointment and hurt and destruction, that we changed our relationship with nature then. I just think there's something about all of that that's very interesting.
Would it be wrong to say, I mean, my own feeling about this darkness, and I agree, there is darkness and occasionally shade and darkness, but it's human produced usually.
Yeah.
I mean, the animals and birds and plants, just do what they do.
Yeah.
And they do it as nicely and as correctly as they do. And you know, the hawk killing the pigeon is part of the game, and pigeons all know that they could be got by the hawk any day. But I'm afraid it's us. I'm afraid it's the humankind that have brought the darknesses. And when you talk about the famine, of course the famine, you know, nature, yes, in a kind of a way, but the real famine occurred because there wasn't the right human response to a natural disaster.
But if you were, you know, a family in Strokestown, County Roscommon, and you had no, you know, all you could see was that the plants had let you down, you know, or that some god or something had brought about, you know, it was the understanding. But I agree with you, the actual reason was about human response.
It's a lovely insight. I often think of, okay, you'll have somewhere connected to the Battle of the Boyne or Vinegar Hill or the famine, and we will feel darkness there. But of course it's human darkness. Yeah, the animals were quite happy. The animals during the famine thrived, a lot of them did, ravens and other. I want to ask both of you again on the specific places that you're now living in. So Michael, you have a description of, I think there's a stream, again, I was born and brought up in Dublin, never heard of this, the Owen Dove River or the stream, that you, when you're getting a bus into Dublin, you will take 10 minutes early just to linger by a Dublin river. And we know the Dodder, we know the Poddle, we know the Liffey, none of us ever linger by them.
I'm sorry, I fall in that way.
But I want to,
really what I'm trying to say in that, Manchán, is that where I live in typical suburbia is like a lot of other typical suburban areas. If you look, there are places nearby that are rich in wildlife. And nearby me there is a river which in the 19th century would have been used, there would have been 20 mills on it, all the way up to, it's a mountain stream that comes down and joins the Dodder. There would have been 20 mills. But since that period, it's become a hidden thing in a kind of a cavern, a ravine. And there's roads around it and there's houses and everything else. But people don't stop and look, and I stop, and there's the heron there, and there's the dipper, and the dipper is dipping in. And I mean, imagine a bird that dives into the water, walks along the bottom and has his lunch. I mean, you know, that's as exotic as anything in the Galapagos, for crying out loud, you know. And to me, that's wonderful. But I look in there and I see this. So there's an old garden which had been a beautifully landscape garden before, that's gone into a bit of rack and ruin. But in that, it still is a wonderful wildlife base. Across from the back of my house, there's a spinney of beech trees, which were planted by the artist. I've forgotten now his name.
Leary? No?
No. Anyway, they were planted in the 30s, and they're big and beautifully majestic now. But there's a sparrowhawk nests in there every year, and there's a battle every year with the magpies, with the sparrowhawk. And there's these things, every suburban area, take a local old graveyard. Old graveyards haven't ever seen any chemicals, ever in their lives. But they have plants that are actually rare in the little old graveyard, or a railway siding that's been disused. These are all locations that we still have where they're asylums for animals, birds and plants. And they're the things we need to treasure, because we've wrecked everything else, really. And now we're trying to put it all back in our gardens. But there are these places, as I say, in my suburban area. Then there's the parks. Now the parks do tend to get the grasses mowed and everything else, but nevertheless the parks are still wonderful places for kinds of wildlife. So really what I'm saying, Manchán, is you don't have to go to the Galapagos or to West Kerry. You know, it's all around you if you just open your eyes and be prepared to take it in.
Yeah. And Jane, would you mind sharing with me an insight of, I'm very familiar with the Glendalough Valley, but the Glenmalure Valley I don't know. As an insider, as someone living there, tell me.
Yeah, well, it is quite remote. And that's part of what's kind of exciting about it. It's a very long valley with the Avonbeg River running alongside it. And it's like, we did a walk one day with Zoe Devlin, you know, the wildflower woman who's fantastic. We found 95 species of wildflowers between Glenmalure Lodge and the top of the valley. 95 in a 3 hours walk. I mean, isn't that just incredible?
Astonishing.
But that's there because it isn't being fertilised. It isn't intensive farming because the land isn't good enough, and you know, all the little fields and the rocks and everything. You wouldn't be having big tractors and combine harvest or whatever. That's why they're there. I mean, but if we hadn't Zoe Devlin, we wouldn't have known it was there.
And her book, The Wildflowers of Ireland, and her website, all the information is there. So now that this curiosity is sparked in us, thank God that the books are out there that will allow us to have the information.
Yeah.
Michael and Jane, I am so grateful. Like, that has been a revelation on so many different fronts, that if we take the time to focus on landscape and to see what is there for us, it just by definition, it'll give us these epiphanies. But it was you two who gave them to us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Manchán.
Most welcome.
Thank you.
That's all from this volume of Dublin Book Festival's Departures. Mavila Buechas Osvor Go Luder. Next time we're going to be in Mayo, talking to writer Mike McCormick and poet Alice Kinsella. Slán a goof.